information. All of a sudden, all of these things were coming out because you needed to understand them to have a robust blockchain program. And that's amazing. And so if you're part of an organization that has a blockchain program, I would say latch onto that and ride that wave into getting to modernize some pieces of your infrastructure or bringing up pieces of the cybersecurity agenda that have never really been addressed before. Have you been trying to get HSMs into the infrastructure for a long time? Here's your opportunity. So I think, and if you're someone who's not on the technology side of this necessarily, but is more on the business side of running one of these programs for an organization, I would say you don't necessarily need to look for subject matter experts external to your own org, right? Like, you don't have to go out and find a thought leader who's writing a blog about blockchain. Like, go down to the basement where you keep the cyber people and ask them how this stuff works, because guaranteed you have people that already actually understand what you could be doing and who would provide a great dose of truth to some of the use cases that you're working on. So, similarly, in the public space, blockchain has brought renewed interests and lots of money over the last year into areas of research which were, for the last decade or three, considered pretty niche. And that's been awesome if you work in any of these spaces. So, for example, distributed systems computing. So again, distributed databases have existed for 30 or so years. But it's easy to say, don't use a blockchain, just use a database. But really, if we look at how distributed databases have worked over the last 3 decades, first of all, they're not widely deployed within enterprises, certainly not at the scale that people seem to think that they are. Second of all, they kind of lose stuff sometimes. And in order to address those challenges, people have been working on making consensus mechanisms more robust, making them support higher throughput, or figuring out how you challenge coordination, how you do leader election, how do you handle malicious actors within a system, perhaps. And all of that stuff collectively together is the same kind of research that's underpinning what's happening in both public blockchains and enterprise distributed ledgers. So, sure, if you use something already like Zookeeper or like etcd, they're very useful, but what if you were able to also have a decentralized version of that? What would a decentralized version mean? It would mean that perhaps you could change the trust model of the participants in that network, right? Or for systems where you have extremely high needs for understanding the ordering consistency across space and time of a distributed system, it gets really complicated. And that's another thing that public blockchains are solving for, right? So again, it's a spectrum of what your needs actually look like, but you can start playing around with some of the pieces here and actually create some really useful, interesting things. So I guess we can explain quickly what these things are. But Byzantine fault tolerance is the ability of your network to tolerate malicious actors from inside the network. The classical example is you have a commander who issues an attack command, and then you have 2 different lieutenants who hear the message. How are you supposed to ensure that as this message is communicated around the network that they're getting the accurate information, right? So fault tolerance across these networks, not just in a standard leader election mode, but there's research into all different kinds of consensus mechanisms now, right? Whether you're talking proof of stake or directed acyclic graphs, there's just crazy amounts of things coming out that never would have happened if we didn't have hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars kind of dumped into this sector in the last 3 years. And blockchain people love their trade-off triangles, so here's another one. So there's a trade-off traditionally between systems that are going to be open and accessible, so something where anyone can spin up a node and connect to it in a public network, systems that offer some sort of privacy, so having things that are confidential and secure. If you look at, say, the Bitcoin ledger, it's entirely transparent, even though it's pseudonymous, and systems that are flexible, resilient, and performant. So there's kind of like a security, scalability, accessibility kind of trade-off that's happening here. And so far, we talked a little bit about the distributed systems side, which is really the ability to mess with this side. So things that how open and trustless you can make something, or trust minimized, let's call it, and how flexible, resilient, and performant they are. But also, there's been so much work happening on the confidential and secure side, and this stuff is really fun. So Zero-knowledge proofs, for example, something that has kind of whiled away in the academic niche audience for the last 15 years, and all of a sudden is out there powering some really interesting projects. For example, Zcash, full disclosure, I am on their foundation board, but that's a nonprofit entity. ZK snarks are zero-knowledge, succinct, non-interactive arguments of knowledge, right? What does that mean? Who cares? It allows you to verify the correctness of statements without actually knowing what the inputs to computations are or having to execute them yourselves. So a real-life example of this could be, let's say you get like 3 people together and you want to figure out, or they want to figure out amongst the 3 of them, who has the highest salary. But none of them actually want to disclose their salary. In the current world, what you'd probably have to do is get a 4th person who serves as that trusted intermediary. They all report their salaries honestly to that person, and that person figures out, executes the algorithm, and then lets all 3 of them know. So zero-knowledge proofs allow you to do the same thing, but without having that central trusted intermediary. Snarks are a specific type of zero-knowledge proof that allow you to essentially make an attestation about anything you can represent as a polynomial. It gets very mathy. But if you're interested, the Zcash project is doing a lot of really interesting work there. They've completely come up with new BLS curves around this and everything. They've got an upgrade coming out in the next, I think, week or 2 that's bringing down the time that it would take to generate a zero-knowledge proof in their system from 40 seconds to about 7 seconds. So just core fundamental cryptographic research is advancing because of this, and that's awesome and fun. And not to only shill Zcash to you, there's also bulletproofs is another area of research. And some of the libraries for bulletproofs, there's a Rust implementation that's available as a standalone library that you can download. So it doesn't have to be, again, related to cryptocurrency. But in this case, they're specifically making attestations about range proofs. So you could say, for example, I want to get a car lease, and I need to prove to you that my income is over X amount, but not under infinity. Like, you can make statements like that. And it also, they've done some interesting things with circuits where you can reduce large problem sets to just to small circuits to execute here. Anyway, so cool new stuff. Feel free to ask me more questions later if you want. I just want to make sure we have enough time, or I'll ramble all day on these. Secure multi-party computation. Here's the salary highest example that I had put up here. So again, you would want to use something where you can, without having that third party that's there. So Shamir secret sharing traditionally allows you to break up pieces of a secret, distribute it to multiple people. You need M of n of them to come together in order to reconstruct a secret. So the reason that cryptocurrency people are super excited about this is it could potentially be a solution to that, oops, I lost my private key thing. Right? So instead, if you could break up a secret and perhaps have other people with your consent, you could reconstruct your key, then all of a sudden it's not so terrible if you're the only custodian or the only person that holds your key. In working in an institutional banking setting, it's similarly important because there are legal requirements to have custodians hold your money, and it's not really clear for crypto assets what custodianship means. There's a whole thing around having things online in hot wallets versus offline in cold wallets, but that's not necessarily enough. And when you get people that want to say, I have my money, I am my own bank, I have access to it at any time, but also your custodian really is the one who holds it, it can get complicated what the legal arrangement there looks like. And so when you start using various types of secret sharing, you can create more complex custody arrangements. And then finally, Schnorr signatures. Bitcoin recently added these as well as a way to reduce the number of signatures, or compress kind of the number of signatures that are required to do something in a multi-party way. So if any of that stuff is interesting, should I read the cartoon? Can you read it from back there? So I don't know if anybody's seen the XKCD, where it's like the crypto nerd's imagination of like, oh no, this laptop is encrypted with like, crazy encryption. We're never going to be able to get at it. Like, quick, spin up a huge network. And then the other side is like what actually happens in real life, and it's just a person with a wrench that's like hit him in the head and ask for his private key. So threat models. Threat models are important. So this one says, his Ethereum hardware wallet has an 8-digit PIN. Shoot, our caper is foiled. But what really would happen is, oh, he has a hardware wallet. Well, let's check his sock drawer to see if he has a recovery phrase. Bingo. So right now, the operational security model of most people that are involving themselves with cryptocurrency is not quite as robust as it needs to be. And going forward, we need to get from the passwords on a post-it next to your monitor to LastPass kind of, or 1Password kind of equivalent, or a lot of people are going to be losing a lot of money, right? So usability is where we need to go. It's all fun. It's all like fun and games to talk about like yay, brand new crypto research, crypto meaning cryptography. But if we can't make this stuff usable to people in the real world, then it's not necessarily that helpful. I'll say that multiple times until people remember. Okay, and then finally, another really fun thing, analysis-resistant networking. So projects like Tor, projects like I2P have been around for some time. Other mixed-net research still continue to be seen as the realm of people that need to hide something from somebody because they're doing something wrong. Also, you know, dissident journalists, there's the entire kind of, the challenge here being that your threat model is again changing to how are we going to handle passive resistance to a global passive adversary. It gets like super crazy in that space. And it's been awesome to see so much more research going into how to maintain privacy at the networking layer. So previously I was talking about privacy at the protocol layers with the bullet proofs and the ZK snark stuff. So this would be more at the networking layer where we're trying to obscure where stuff is going and the actual kind of routing of packets and messages within the networks. And so Tor also you can consider to be more centralized with its broadcast list of peers and things. So we're trying to kind of get around that. And Dandelion is a new project that aims to do that. And there's some good talks. I tried to put at least one link on each of these things if you want to go learn more. But they've done some really interesting kind of mathematical proving around how to create the most efficient and most anonymity adding kind of routing. And it turns out that they came up with this stem and fluff kind of idea, so it looks like a dandelion. So messages pass through a specific kind of order, and then they are broadcast globally. It's neat stuff. So this is something that completely didn't exist, you know, a year ago. Honestly, it's that new. Okay, so where are we going with this? Well, we're creating an internet of value, right? Yay, programmable money. We solved everything, right? Okay, so what the heck are these things? I don't know. Does anybody know the difference between DWeb and the decentralized web, or Web 3.0 and Web 3? Because like all of these have conferences. Like there's different conferences for all of these things, right? So I sat down and I tried to literally figure out what the difference between all of these were. And I gave another talk a little while ago that hopefully will be online soon with some fun analysis of internet search trends and things about them. But the point is like nobody knows what any of these things are unless you're old enough to remember actual Web 3.0. Does anyone remember the Semantic Web? Who remembers the Semantic Web? Yeah, well we're all using that now, right? Totally worked out because take back your data. Okay, so Wired in 2010 called the Semantic Web a fully distributed web-based system for publishing logical assertions. Well, that's amazing because it's exactly the same words that we use now to describe this kind of decentralized web kind of smart contract blockchain thing that we're all building. That's Web 3. So if it didn't work in 2010, why is it going to work now? Obviously, the answer is money. We have tokens now. But it's not just economics. There's identity, and there's a lot of other challenges that underlie these systems. So why didn't Web 3.0 happen? First of all, that's a machine learning. Thank you. So first of all, it turns out that getting everyone in the world to agree on a single ontology of data globally and then mark up everything that has ever been put on the web so that it conforms to these kinds of standards, like, ain't gonna happen. Right? And turned out it was a lot easier, especially because those things are gameable for SEO and other things, that the map is not the territory. Parsing the underlying data and grabbing context out of the actual words that are there turned out to be much more accurate. And so people stopped tagging things up because we could just let the robots do it. And then who did a really good job of building the robots and who has the data now? Right, business model. Those are business models. Thank you. I'll be here all week. Okay, so it turns out that money matters as well. And as much as we wanted RSS and XMPP and open standards and adversarial interoperability to continue to be a thing, people wanted the usability of these walled garden experiences, and we kind of let it happen. And even though there were a lot of people screaming, the same people who are screaming net neutrality and other things, there's a dedicated core of people that care about these things, but it's never been enough to kind of shift the tide there. And so hopefully, we're at this point where there are these new things that are coming out. There are advances in tools, open tools for machine learning. There are these cryptographic advances that allow you to thread the needle between privacy and sharing, and to do selective disclosure, and to do zero-knowledge attestation, and again, the kind of hardware-level security and things that we didn't have before. And there's also peer-to-peer micropayments certainly should not be underestimated. So somewhere in there, we can possibly create these kinds of microeconomies, but we need the tools to be able to manage them that regular, normal humans can have without needing to quit their job to become data arbitrageurs during the day as a career choice. Oh, the web or next. So I didn't know the difference between, let me do this again. I didn't know the difference between Web3 and decentralized web and all these things. I couldn't figure it out, so I made up my own word. Okay, so it's the web or next. So obviously we're on the web or nets now, so this would be the web or next. That's what's coming. And what I did is I tried to kind of rationalize the things that sounded good about all of these different projects, because they don't really agree on a lot of things. If you're trying to build something on a Polkadot network versus trying to build something on like a Fabric network versus all these other kind of decentralized BitTorrent-y kind of projects, they do not use the same language. So what would actually be a useful system? Well, hopefully something where data can be kept closer to its point of origin, where we are moving to more of a least authority model for trust management, where you have low-level protocols that are censorship resistant, but platforms and applications might not be. Where you have data and identity that allow more consent and opt-in from the users, but where you can also possibly offload that kind of consent to someone that you do trust. And where we can ideally revisit this kind of adversarial interoperability place, but which is also known as just open web standards. But in order to revisit that, we can't start there by saying that's what we want to get to. We need to solve the business challenges first. Blockchains were helpful, not where they're not helpful, and a user experience that rivals the current web. All of that would be awesome. Do I think it's necessarily attainable and achievable? I'm not sure. But I think this is an interesting kind of map to keep close when we evaluate, are we achieving our goals here, or are we just trying to deploy another blockchain? Are we trying to give consent to people? Are we trying to help people challenge hegemony of existing incumbents? Or are we trying to like maximize some coin value? Important questions. And this is how I think of it. I had posted this on Twitter already if you want it. But so there is actual like architectural thinking under this that is different about how you can map peer-to-peer and decentralized types of applications to them. So different projects can map to this. It's not just for blockchain projects. It's for projects that simply are not based on a centralized server architecture. And then if you're interested, so this is what Clovyr does in the green box. We're working with a bunch of types of blockchains and other peer-to-peer protocols. And it's a completely open source extensible framework, so hopefully someone will build Tor integration, but I'm not doing that right now. Anyway, so I think that we are only doomed to repeat history if we don't learn for it, right? So this time around, if we're going to do all of this stuff again, and we're going to say, take back your data, the cypherpunk dream is not dead, this time we need to acknowledge that the business models matter, that developer experience matters, that end user experiences matter, and that politics matter. Politics at the geopolitical level matter, at the literally the nation state level matter. You know, there are crypto asset projects. You know, the 3 countries that have created their own cryptocurrencies that are state-backed projects right now are China, Russia, and Venezuela, and it's like not a coincidence. You know, so if you recall the splinternet kind of crypto wars of the 90s, all of that stuff that's old is new again, and we're encountering the same exact types of challenges. There's funding for specific protocols that use different cryptographic suites that are have nothing to do with NIST. I mean, all of this stuff is, it's fascinating if you'd like to deep dive into that. Also, if you are a corporate cybersecurity person, if you can work to try to get non-standard cryptographic suites approved, that would be one thing that would really help people that are trying to innovate, right? Because if you want to use something like play around with zero-knowledge attestations, or use something that uses like the Bernstein curves and things, like this is not part of your standard corporate suites. And a lot of times innovation projects, like they kind of die. So that's my plea to you, please help. And so also the politics of your open source communities matter. So what have we learned from this emergent open source community decentralized governance experiment of blockchain land that's happening right now? What have we learned so far, and what do I kind of think that we have yet to learn out there? And some of these challenges are not specific just to blockchain projects. Some of them I think are endemic to just open source in general. Like this is, again, the kind of trade-off or different priorities that you have in open source communities usually. There's some people who want to head for engagement, and they think that engagement is very important. There's some people who are prioritizing the freedom of contributions, and some people who are kind of advocating for community and us all coming together. I grabbed this content from, there's a YouTube talk called The Hard Parts of Open Source that Evan, I'm going to butcher his last name, but I think it's Saplicki, had said. And it's a great talk. I highly recommend taking some time to watch that one. But the different people kind of fall in different places on the spectrum. And driving engagement often comes at the expense of community. A lot of times community managers and open source and stuff, we keep saying, we have to drive engagement. But people are most engaged when they're yelling at each other. And you know, the way to get people most riled up and to tweet the most about your project is to like really piss them off. Or you know, what's the old adage about the best way to get a right answer on the internet is to offer a wrong answer first? So do you want to have people who all think the same thing and are moving in lockstep? How much are you trying to foster discussion about other kinds of ways of doing things forward? And how much do we want centralized control versus kind of the community writ large decides what we're doing next? I mean, it sounds great in theory, but like design by committee generally doesn't work that great. So figuring out, again, where your project kind of falls within that community or within that spectrum can really impact how your community is seen globally. And then this is also a cool idea, which is the idea of implementing, again, as a UX thing, like in your forums, the idea of structured conversations. So when you want to make a post, if you actually click, I would like to learn something right now. So you've broadcast to people, I am trying to learn right now, as opposed to, you know, I am trying to just make a random opinion or express myself. So I'm trying to learn, and someone who's trying to answer, you can ask for a clarification or can attempt to answer. And when they attempt to answer, they first need to restate your question. This is a specifically enforced usability workflow that tries to de-escalate problems through interface design. And it's kind of interesting. You get a lot more kind of human interaction and a lot kinder communities. But it takes work, and it's not best for all projects. So other lessons we have yet to learn. That's like my favorite GIF. I love that one. OK, so since I know there's a lot of enterprise open source folks here, and having run a corporate open source project myself, people will ask or wonder, why is my fancy open source project failing? I've put it on the GitHub. It's there, and yet the people have not come. The people are not contributing. We need to drive more engagement. Set up a meetup. Like, we need more stickers. And that's not really where engagement comes from, right? People contribute to open source projects because it kind of almost solved a problem that they have right now. They needed to augment or change something specific in order to make that work, and then they would like to give that addition back. You know, they didn't come in and say like, well, let me look at the project roadmap that's here that they've published and figure out like, you know, I have 4 hours free right now. I'd like to like punch my time card. That's how employed labor works. And so we see a lack of engagement in a lot of these corporate open source projects because people are seen as more free labor than humans, right? And I think in the blockchain and open sourcey space, it's a little different because economics are so conflated with the work there. And people do have this idea that they're going to get a payout soon, so there is more quote unquote free work, or you're economically invested in that you've bought the coin and now you're doing the work. But still there is just so few qualified people that the code contributions across these projects is still what I would consider highly centralized. I'm working on some statistics around that. It'll be out in a couple weeks, but it's interesting stuff. People are going to get super mad on Twitter. I'm really excited. Okay. But there are some lessons that I think that we have learned. So design by committee is hard. Design by minor voting and all of the kind of decentralized signaling and all this other stuff that you find in public blockchain networks is especially hard. It's really cool, and there's going to be a lot of master's theses written on it, but it's a very hard way to progress forward, and it does make change necessarily slow. That's not always a bad thing, especially when you look at the resilience and the relatively low rate of catastrophic failure within these projects. Economic incentives create complex socio-political factions, which is like a hard way of saying like mo money, mo problems, I guess. But once you have instituted economics in these systems, like people really care. It's no longer just like, how should we sign this integer? It's like, oh my God, you're messing with my livelihood. And people get really heated really, really quickly. You can't really overestimate developer loyalty. So although we have felt like we have this community, when there's a new project raises X hundreds of millions of dollars and then launches its own VC fund to build new tools, developers kind of might go where the money is. And some of them do and some of them don't. But it turns out that the network effects, especially this early within these communities, are not nearly as sticky as we kind of thought that they were going to be. I think front-loading diversity and inclusion have paid off in that space. It was like very vocal very early on what people wanted the inclusivity story to be for these kinds of developer projects. And sure, a lot of that is because people thought like Bitcoin was hostile to women, et cetera, et cetera. But I've seen that because they put so much work in it up front, the community is changing very rapidly, and there are a lot of people that are attracted to these projects. And because of that, I think it's just worth saying, I know sometimes it feels nebulous, and if you're SQLite, and you just want to throw a code of conduct in there just to jab at your community, like maybe think twice, because that's not, what kind of community do you want to create here? And finally, it is indeed possible to successfully fork a project. So some people, when they do get pissed off, do take their ball and go home, and that's okay, because sometimes that results in another almost equally successful project. And then finally, to close here, and then I'm happy to take some questions and have some discussion. I just think it's worth saying that technology does not obviate our responsibility for system design. None of these things that I talked about are going to take away the ethical sorts of choices that we make when designing these systems, and the trade-offs that we have to make between giving people fundamental privacy versus the ability to do enforcement of what we consider actions against bad actors. So it's the same trade-off, anonymity and abuse, et cetera. I pulled this from Alex Stamos had tweeted this a little while ago. He's the former CISO at Facebook. And these are ongoing conversations. This is about the types of systems that you want to create. And I think it's important to have more vocal conversations about these trade-offs. But no single choice, technology is neutral kind of regardless. I disagree with that statement. But this technology allows us to implement these things that we have thought through. And sometimes the things that we think through have unintended consequences when they reach scale. But we can't really expect some brand new thing to come in and solve, quote unquote, blockchain is magic. It's not. It's up to us to make these things do what we'd like them to do. So, thank you. It looks like I have like 6 minutes for chit chat if anybody would like to ask a question or yell at me about anything in specific. Yeah, go ahead. I don't know, do we have mics for questions or are we just shouting? Okay.
Do you aware of Substratum project?
Do I have what?
Strato?
Strato? Wait, substrate or substratum? I know substrate and I know strato. I don't know substratum. Okay, you can tell me about it later.
Decentralized web hosting and internet censorship that project tries to solve. And if you're familiar, I want to ask you.
Sure, we can chat about specific projects after. Yeah, because I need to know more about it than censorship resistant. So come find me. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a lot of information about blockchains and pieces of blockchain.
She said that's a lot of information. Thank you.
How does like a noob like myself start learning about it? There seems to be
Well, how do you start learning about these things? I mean, I tried to include like getting up to speed links on some of the specific projects I was talking about, but in general, it's a mix. I mean, it depends what kind of organization you want and what outcome you want out of it. It's okay to start with white papers. I mean more like the consulting white papers than the crypto white papers. But pretty soon you should look at like the blog posts from some of the leaders in the space that are writing stuff. I think crypto Twitter is actually really good. And I should probably just have like a list of references. That's a hard question to ask because I don't want to slight anybody. There's also a few podcasts that are good. If you're interested more in enterprise stuff, 11FS does one that's called Blockchain Insider. If you want more public stuff, Laura Shin does one called Unconfirmed. Those are Unchained. There's two. She does two. But yeah, go ahead.
All right. So earlier you had Bitcoin not being private or confidential, and your role the three.
Correct.
Pick two. Do you think eventually Bitcoin will have some, especially with like Lightning Network, where it's truly peer-to-peer united broadcasting? Do you think it kind of fits a little bit more on the confidential and secure or privacy side a little bit better than it did, years ago? But now it's fitting all three.
I definitely think that the privacy outlook for Bitcoin is getting better because there's been so much screaming about it over the last couple of years. I'm not going to make any specific statements about Lightning because that's a hotly contested impact of privacy based on Lightning thing. But yeah, I mean, even just like the Dandelion thing that you're looking at, like you could implement that on top of Bitcoin and it would be helpful. There's a lot of things that you can do. Monero just adding like I2P support with their like Clovyr stuff I think was really good. So yeah, it shouldn't necessarily be about like put on your team shirt. Like we're not playing sports here. So it's not, I mean, I guess if you own a bunch of one coin, you're incentivized to have that be the only thing that wins. But I think Zcash is doing really fantastic work, but there are other projects that are taking that work and also running with it. And even across the members of the developer, like all these developers kind of know each other. Right? Like the people that have been on early zero knowledge publication papers are working in like multiple different projects now. So I think, yes, the outlook of privacy for Bitcoin, I hope, is good, and that it's spurring more and more research into other projects. I hope no coins are launched in like a year that aren't quote unquote privacy coins, because everything should be a privacy coin. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm interested in the level of accessibility and, I would say, outreach of knowledge related to blockchain in public settings. For example, I am just picturing my own education, and although it was several years back when I first encountered technology in a formal setting, nowhere, never did I, even in passing, glance against any concepts that intersect with blockchain. And is there any change that you either detect or, I should say,
Yeah.
detect even the desire to make this earlier or make it more widespread?
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's still very nebulous.
Yeah, it is nebulous. I mean, literally, I haven't seen kind of the concepts underlying the technology, quote unquote, presented. That's literally why I wanted to break it out this way, because it's presented as this monolithic, like, blockchain thing to people. And honestly, I think it's bananas that this room is the same size as the DevOps room. Like, that's ridiculous. But people are super excited to learn more about this technology, and we can either sit them down and say, like, here's a use case end-to-end where we're going to solve derivative settlement, or here's a use case, we're going to put all your healthcare data on a blockchain. It's like terrifying. Or you can say, like, you know, zero-knowledge attestation could be incredibly useful for a number of projects and could be implemented in a centralized setting and a not a centralized setting. So I hope that, yeah, we do see more of that where you break out the pieces and then people put them together in new ways. That's what it's supposed to be about. That's why kind of that architecture diagram that I have is a really fun thought exercise. You can take something like BitTorrent and like map it onto that. And like that's solving a real world problem. Maybe not one that people wish existed, but like that's a problem. And then if you think about like why did BitTorrent rise? And then why did BitTorrent kind of traffic collapse as Netflix came out? It's not because the technology changed, it's because business models changed, right? So to allow us to confront this interplay between the technical components and the business models that are just so transparent. I mean, bug bounties in cryptocurrency systems are like literally quantified. Like, go get the money, that's how much it's worth. Like, an exploit is that much. And that's awesome. So I hope to see more talks that are about that kind of cool stuff and less about how we all get rich, I guess. I think that's all I have time for, but if you want to corner me over there, I'll be there. Thank you.